welcome to our panel discussion on democracy. What does democracy mean to people's everyday lives? I'm Heather Hamilton of Brookline Interactive Group and a member of the League of Women Voters, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's conversation. This panel conversation is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts and the local leagues of Amherst, Boston, Concord, Carlisle, Dover, Sherborne, Falmouth, Harvard, Marblehead, Needham, Newton, Sharon, Stoughton, Waltham, Wayland, Westford, and Williamstown, and is co-produced by NewTV. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, multi-issue grassroots organization that encourages informed, active participation of citizens. The goal of the League is to empower citizens to shape better communities worldwide. This discussion is being recorded on Thursday, October 24th, 2024, at the NewTV studios in Newton, Massachusetts. Now, I'd like to welcome our panelists to our democracy discussion. Joining us today, Dr. Rachael Cobb is an associate professor of political science at Suffolk University, specializing in American politics with a particular focus on voting rights and political participation. Tim Matthews is an 8th grade civics teacher at F.A. Day Middle School in Newton. Tim has been teaching for 30 years and has long advocated for expanding civics education at the middle and high school levels. Cheryl Clyburn Crawford has served as the executive director of MassVOTE for the past 12 years. MassVOTE is an organization founded in 2001 to fight for political, racial, and economic equality. Their mission is to increase voter turnout, modernize election laws, and engage the next generation of leaders. Let's begin. Welcome, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us today.
We're just going to have a nice, friendly conversation about democracy, as one does on a Thursday. So to get us started, I mentioned, everyday democracy. I think there's been so much focus on the presidential that we kind of forget about all of the other layers of government and positions that you have to run in order to hold. But just kind of break it down. What do we mean by a democracy? And we've heard some terms thrown out, socialism, communism, fascism. How did we come to be, and what should we remind people of what this country was kind of founded on? Let's start with the 8th grade teacher.
Oh, because this is a great 8th grade question, because kids are like, what is democracy?
Exactly.
How does it work? Because they learn in 7th grade what democracy is and what a republic is. But I try and define it for the kids is it's just having a say in your government, having a say in your life. Do you have a voice, and how they can actually add their voices?
Yeah,
Let's graduate to the graduate level to go on to college. What are you doing to kind of facilitate this conversation?
Well, I think there is what I talk about with my students, a language of democracy, a set of norms that is what sort of constitutes a democracy. It is absolutely having a say in your government, but it is also a structure of government that does have regular elections. It has a series of branches that check each other. It is a set of powers that are not that don't go unchecked, let's say, and that enables people to stop things when they want to. Sometimes we have a little bit too much of that when we talk about the gridlock in Congress, for example, and not being able to get things done. But at the same time, those are also checks on making sure that policies that we really don't want to get passed maybe don't get passed, although sometimes we want things to be passed. So, so also democracy is challenging. We have to try to find consensus, and we have to try to compromise. That's also hard. And so there's a language about that and a discussion that needs to be had. And that's one of the things that I think we're struggling with in this country right now, is how to not talk past each other.
So you graduate from school, you start living, your everyday. What are some of the things that your organization, Cheryl, is doing to remind us, as adults, how is democracy impacting our everyday life, and why is it so important?
So democracy is a system created for us, for the people to have a say in how we're governed. But I have to say, the groups that I work with base building, grassroots organizations. And the conversations that we're having are around democracy being a misnomer. Democracy being a misnomer in the way that it was written and the way that we perform it, right? We have all these other issues that are at the table. Democracy was not written for everybody because, you have to go back and do the work, right? And look at it. When we go back and we think about who it was written for and how it was functioning. And I have to say, it's not functioning very well, but we continue to fight, right, for democracy because we know that we can make the change. We can do all of the things that we need to do collectively if we have another day to fight. And that's what we focus on. We talk about the system, how it doesn't really work for everybody. But what can we do about it? You can't just blow up the system and not have a system until you really figure out, you get in the room and you figure out, but what system are we going to put in place? When you brought up fascism, communism, socialism, and all those other factors, when we're trying to fight for democracy, those are just different lenses on how people believe that it should be run, our government. But we still believe in a democratic government, little d, right? Is that right? A little d, democratic government, but we have to do something about the way it's implemented and administered and seen.
I want to stay on this point because I think you bring up a good one. When it was originally founded, it was founded, so that men, primarily white men, would be able to vote. Landholding men would be able to vote. And, that is no longer the case. But I think it's very important to bring that into the discussion. So I served on my local board in my town, and I've noticed that there's just kind of a lack of understanding at what the federal, state, and local government has power to do. And one of the biggest powers that the local government has is over property taxation. That is where almost 90% of any local municipality's funding comes from. What are some everyday, democratic things, roads, schools, that you would encourage people to really think about, to maybe try to motivate them to look down the ballot and elect someone who may better reflect their values?
Absolutely. When we always talk about local politics. All politics is local. It's great that we have this big presidential election and everybody's paying attention to that. We direct our attention at our organizations to really focus on what's happening on the municipal level, because those are the things that really affect your quality of life on a regular basis. When we talk about schools, education, health care, just food deserts, all of those things are typically on the ballot. We always ask people to make sure that they turn the ballot over, pay attention to the ballot questions, because those ballot questions are what's important to your community, right? Presidential election is going to happen, for sure. But what we need to make sure is our state representatives and senators, even when it's a municipal year, our city councilors, those are the people that we can actually talk to. We can go to their office. We can advocate for issues directly to them.
Excellent. Tim, it looks like you want to jump in.
I have so much to say about so many things that I'm thrilled to be having this conversation, because we started talking about democracy, and I think you hit on a topic like, are we a democracy or are we a constitutional republic? We pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, this republic. So getting kids to understand how our system of government actually works. But then I jump to your thing about working at the local level. The kids don't understand we got to talk to President Biden about fixing our streets. That's not who does it. So it's an education piece. And the things that the kids care about the most happen at the local level. So and that's where they have the most direct vote, our closest chance at democracy.
Yeah. Rachel, I want to bring up, I could see you going there, and I'm like, oh, not yet. The role of the minority in a majority democracy. I was a nerd of civics, and I read the Federalist Papers and really fell in love with Madison's take on how to guard against a faction. Tell us more about how the minority is protected in a democracy where the majority rules.
Sometimes.
Not always.
It's a good book out called The Tyranny of the Minority. I would say so, but yes, our system is designed in such a way. Madison was thinking when he was writing Federalist 10 that that precisely as you said, how do we guard against small groups rising up and essentially taking over? So one of the things that the founders were really concerned about was mob rule. They were really concerned about demagogues. They were really concerned about a king. They were really concerned about lots of people voting. At the time of the founding, about 5% of the population could vote.
Wow.
So it was a very small group of people who were voting. Yeah. But they were thinking about how information travels, what people are going to learn, how they're going to know who to vote for and what to vote for. Democracy was pretty scary to them. And all of this was an experiment, thinking about how you elect a president, et cetera. Okay, so that sort of sets the stage for this. They were concerned about both majority and minority rule and like people doing things. Like, how do we do this? So the idea was, well, as long as we make it complicated, as long as we have all of these different systems, we have the local government, we have the state government, we have the federal government, we have a Congress, we have a court, we have an executive. All of those are going to stop people from doing things so that we make sure that it doesn't get too rowdy and too popular in some ways. Now, the minority is... we have all kinds of systems in place essentially to protect minority interests, and that is that I can get more complicated on. So I think I will cede the floor to my colleagues to say a little bit more about that.
Tim?
Well, I'll let you jump on the minority voices and how do we expand on that, because it sounds like your organization, that's what they're working and bringing in a bunch of different voices, and how can different voices be heard?
We do. Thank you. We do. Absolutely. MassVOTE, our mission, we work with new citizens, lower income, and communities of color, because we feel like they've been disenfranchised, right? And so we want to make sure that they understand that they do have a voice. One vote, one voice, right? One vote, one person. Everybody gets one vote. But people don't realize that. People don't understand how that one vote matters. I know a city councilor in the city of Boston that realizes it. Councilor Julia Mejia won by literally one vote, right, when they did the recount. But when you bring in other voices, you need other voices at the table, whether they're majorities or whether they're minorities, so that they can just give their point of view, so that you can see it from their perspective. We don't always see it from the same perspective. We need their voices added in the mix for that very reason, so that we can understand. Otherwise, we go on what we know, what we've been taught. Until you're in the room with other people that have a different opinion, then you'll think your opinion is the only opinion or the right opinion, which it may not be necessarily true. When we're going in and we're doing legislative actions, we're always talking to the communities of what do they want? What do you need? Because every jurisdiction around Massachusetts is different. We work on a regional basis. We have regions, and all the regions have different needs, and they're all doing different things. And so bringing in these minorities, which I don't call them minorities, but for that reason. But yeah, your voice is just as powerful as anybody else's.
Sure.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, I think we should make clear that there are different kinds of minorities. I mean, and this is one of the clarifications I always make in my class, that we have minorities who in the United States we talk about as people of color and different ethnic groups. And then we also have minority in the sort of, in a legislative setting, the minority party. And in a legislative setting, the minority party actually has a voice and we have a set of rules that enable those voices to be part of it, but not necessarily to have as much power as they want. But we enable the discussion to be had, and we structure it so that everybody's voice is heard.
And I can't help think about like the state legislature, primarily Democratic, very small number, maybe 34 Republicans in the House of Representatives. But I think that gets us at better bills because it slows it down and makes us a little more thoughtful. So that is like the Republicans are the minority, but they do provide value.
Yeah. So we're getting into kind of the next couple of topics, fair representation, and also, combating the notion, my vote doesn't really count. What are some things that people should be aware of when they feel disenfranchised, or they're in a state where one party tends to dominate? So the fights usually are over the primary. When you get to the general, you don't have too many contested races along the ballot. What are some things that you're hoping people will take hold of so that they really do feel like their vote matters?
I can jump in.
Okay.
I would say a couple of things. Number one, Massachusetts also has an incredibly high incumbency rate and not a lot of challengers. We are one of the lowest states, the lowest level of challengers. So we need more people to run for office in Massachusetts. That's really important because one of the things that drives voting and drives everything is some healthy competition and some people who are actually being held with their feet to the fire because they're accountable because somebody's going to try to run against them at the primary level and the general level. So that's number one. It's really important to have people running for office and to have people engaged. But the other thing is, and this is sort of, there's like two hats that we wear. As all of us think about what a campaign strategy, and then there's also the kind of make government inclusive and make voting rights for all strategy. And the campaign strategy, when a politician decides to run for office, one of the very first things they do is they get the voter list. The voter list is their ticket to knowing who is voting and therefore who they need to appeal to. If you're not on the voter list, you don't matter to them. Their goal is to go after the people who vote. Why should they waste their time on people who don't vote? They have little time and little money, and their goal is to get elected. So they're looking at all of those people who are super voters, who are the people who vote in every single election. Those are the people they know they have to appeal to in order to get elected. And so the people who vote sometimes, never, are not on their list. If you vote, you're on their list. And that's one of the key ways that we start to have power, is by being somebody who's on that list who they want to appeal to.
I will absolutely confirm this. I ran as, for my local board, and the first thing I was told was, get yourself the frequent voters list.
Right.
And it's usually the people who have voted in at least the last 3 elections. So that is absolutely so true. And I want to kind of go back to a point that you made when you said that 5% of, originally 5%
Of the population
were the ones to vote. If you look at who's voting in the local elections, it does not get much above 11% of registered voters.
That's right.
So, I kind of scoffed, but things haven't changed all that much. They're eligible to vote, but they're not coming out to vote.
I think a part of the issue as well, as Rachel just mentioned, the top 20%, they're going to go after those super voters.
Yeah.
MassVOTE in our organizations, we work with, so everybody from 0 to 100. There's the population 0 to 20, they never vote, ever, for anything. Then there's 20 to 80. That's where we thrive, between 20 and 80%, because those are people that can be persuaded. those are people that can be educated, right? They don't always vote. They don't always feel like they're being represented. I have 2 jobs, 5 kids. I have to go home and cook, a husband. I don't have time for this. And whenever I vote, it doesn't matter because my point of view is not necessarily being reflected. You know, so when we talk about how do we make people, help people to understand that their vote counts, I think one of the things we could do is get rid of the Electoral College. That's a big one. The Electoral College, and most people want to get rid of that thing. Gerrymandering, all the things, all the barriers that are in place that keep people from voting. We want to get rid of those things, those types of things. And the other thing we really want to do is pass the John Lewis Advancement Bill, which restores the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The thing about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, they dismantled Section 4B because they say it was outdated. I don't understand why we do not get rid of the Electoral College as they say it is outdated. We have to do something about that.
Tim, I'd love to hear your take.
Wow, so much. Everything from Electoral College to gerrymandering. And, you know, I always view it through the lens of my students, that students care. And in 8th grade, they feel like their vote matters because we always talk about civic knowledge, your head, civic beliefs, your heart, or your hand, civic action. How can you get things done? It's inculcating that belief at an early age that your vote actually matters. And I tell the Julia Mejia story because it's amazing one vote with a recount, how it can do it. But it's also when you were a select person coming into the schools and talking to kids, like, this person responds to me, my vote matters, I can talk to that person. And what's pretty powerful in my school is the kids that talk about, hey, I just looked at the ballot with my mom and my dad last night. They were filling it out, and how do we as adults set the examples for the kids?
I think one of the ways we set the example is by bringing them in the booth with us when they're little. So that they don't feel intimidated by it.
Yes.
They just automatically.
A distinct memory of my mom bringing me with her when she was voting, and she was voting at my elementary school. So it was a familiar place, and it felt special. So I love voting, and Massachusetts makes it, you know, as good as I've seen it, because I voted in Maine, New York, and Virginia, and now in Massachusetts. I mean, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. I was reluctant to do the request a ballot and have it sent to you, but I did it for the first time this year. I like my sticker. Okay. And I like that memory, you know, that I have of me and my mom. So it was hard for me to switch, but from 2020 and the pandemic, we've seen more people switching to early voting. How do you think that's impacted people? Do you think it's provided more participation? Have you heard anything from people who may not have been, you know, prone to voting in person, but now they're doing it because they have access to it, you know, a whole 2 weeks before?
Yeah. These reforms tend to increase a little bit of participation. They're not a game changer, but not having them would be a bad thing. So I'm not saying that it's not setting it through the roof, although this year there's a lot of early voting going on. So it's who knows what's going to happen this year. But in general, they have these small impacts, but they're impacts in the right direction, not in the wrong direction. I do think that having multiple modalities is a really nice thing for people. And I've been talking to friends of mine recently in Massachusetts who really still don't quite understand what early voting is. They understand vote by mail. That makes sense. But the fact that at early voting, you can go to any place to vote, and you're voting in person, and there is somebody to assist you, and there are the machines there for the auto mark machine, if in case you have a disability or want to listen to the ballot in a different language. All of those supports that are really important that you don't necessarily get when you vote by mail are really great. And I think we could do more to educate. By the way, I did hear that in Brookline, the turkey sticker is taking off.
Oh, Ben Kaufman is a great town clerk.
Amazing.
Yeah, and he's a very special person and has a great sense of humor. And I am just tickled that he is the town clerk for the town of Brookline. And so I wasn't really all that surprised. I mean, whatever somebody can do to just, get one or two more people, out, heck, I might still vote in person just to get that sticker.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need a ballot question for stickers.
Maybe. I know I still vote on election day. I do. I get the ballot. I just get the ballot, and I keep it. And then I also check out all the early voting sites to make sure they're running properly. We're not having any real issues. But I personally vote on election day, and I think I read some data that showed that the impact around mail-in ballots and early voting doesn't really exist in communities of color, lower income, and new citizens. It does make a greater impact in the wider suburban cities, right? But not so much in the communities.
And why do you think that is?
I want to say, my own opinion is mistrust in the system. A lot of mistrust in the system.
I think it's also voter education.
And definitely voter education. I mean, something different, something new. We really fought for those barriers, particularly because we thought they would be removed for those particular communities of color, lower income, and new citizens. But finding out people are doing it, but a little reluctant. I think it's getting better, to your point, Rachel. I think it's really getting better because people are becoming more familiar. This year, maybe. I mean, people are voting early, like across the country, early. People are voting by mail early. I think fear and just a little mistrust is just happening in the system right now.
It's so funny that you bring up mistrust. I remember, so the pandemic is starting to set in, and we're going into our local election season in Brookline. This is 2020. I'm on the select board. And that's when we're told that people have to basically request a mail ballot. We can't just send them out. We had that discussion. And so I understand that is relaxed a little bit now, but you still have to basically request one. So to your point about education, even I didn't know that. And I consider myself, pretty aware of what's going on. There was some reticence on the parts of some electeds. Oh, well, we can't trust mail-in ballots. You don't know who's voting. And then we're told about the state of Oregon, who's, I believe they went to all vote by mail.
Long ago.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's just interesting how kind of myopic, you can be in your own town based on, what you know. I'm glad that we've had some perspective, from 2020 to see what's working. I'd be very interested in reading a paper done on how things have changed since 2020. But Tim, why don't we hear from you, like how? I know, the percentage of people under a certain age, let's say 55. I mean, it drops off like a cliff.
So anyway.
No.
Okay, under 55.
For participation. Do you see that changing with the young minds that you see every day?
And prior to walking into the studio, we were talking a little outside about the 2018 Massachusetts law that changed that civics had to be taught for every 8th grader. And I think that is going to make a change because the kids, we have multiple assignments where it's assignment for the kid, but it's also assignment for the parents. I'll have the kids find where's their ward, precinct, and polling location, then make them go home and quiz their parents. It's just, or we do plot yourself on the political spectrum, share that with your parents, have them, we're trying to feed it that way. So I think as each group gets a little older and older, we'll hope that will spread and they'll start the conversation. So I think it is going to increase, but I'm always hopeful.
When did that happen?
2018, they passed a new law, and now there's a new MCAS. We won't talk about ballot questions now. That kids they have to pass a civics MCAS for graduation. As it stands right now.
Very interesting, because to become a U.S. citizen, you have to study and you have to be able to answer these questions. And yeah, I've seen the questions over time, and I gotta say, there are some family members that I hope will not be watching this broadcast that may struggle to answer some of those basic questions.
But without a doubt, but those are mostly factual questions, and I guarantee most 8th graders are smarter than most Americans. But we don't try and just do, can you pass the civics test? Do you understand what were the founders thinking? How have rights expanded over time? Like the history of our nation is a history, in my mind, of the expansion of rights, and how can you pick up that baton and run with it for your generation and try and give them those tools to do that?
I love it. You know, MassVOTE runs a Young Civic Leaders program. High school students, they are so engaged, they're so brilliant, and they really do have a voice. And when we're talking, one of the things that we want them to get out of our program is critical thinking. There's so much misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and so you have to do your own research. But I always let them know that every great movement we've ever had that's had an impact in our life has been led by young people.
I'll say a couple of things to add to this. Number one, I encounter a lot of students who have not had civics, and they feel at age 18 shame about what they don't know. They feel embarrassed by it, and they feel like they should know it. And first of all, that we need to just get rid of that. No shame, no shame. We're just going to learn and help you learn, but they don't know where to go for information. And this is why I also talk about the language of democracy, because a lot of these words are really confusing, like polling location. How do you know that the Secretary of State's website is the place that you go to for information on the election? I mean, all of this stuff is kind of like you got to be in the know to know it. And so that's where civics comes in and all of this education, but there are not a lot of places that are kind of like the natural Google thing that you would be able to find to navigate this if you really are coming to this slate with a blank, not knowing it. If you're not growing up voting with your parents, we now know that there are these voting deserts in the United States. And voting is really a social activity. And so it's something that happens in some communities a lot and in other communities not a lot. And so in those communities, access to information is a real challenge. So I think one of the big hurdles for young people is just knowing stuff. And I have seen politicians who I like very much come to talk to my students and say, yeah, but you don't vote. Well, how is that helpful?
Yeah.
That is not inviting them into the democracy that they're part of. That's right. That is, sort of making them feel shame what they are already feeling. So our job is to know shame, educate, and understand that all of us don't know stuff. Even those of us in the know have to look stuff up a lot and miss things. That's just part of being human.
I once walked into my polling location. I think I was fairly new to Massachusetts at the time and didn't quite comprehend that it was a primary. And they said, which ballot do you want?
Right.
Yeah. I am the type of person, I go, I vote. Right. May not understand what I'm voting on exactly, but I'm there. And I'm like, which one's popular? I mean, I kind of knew that I was making a joke, but they were just like, what?
That's good.
So, I mean, even the people who, I was an undergrad for politics, but when you get down to the local level, it is so nuanced. Mm-hmm. Even by state, it's very difficult to be able to apply the same thing across the board. Cheryl.
I just want to, pipe in on, I am really happy you brought up that piece about shame because we really do see it in the community. Whenever I'm doing a voter registration drive, I've taught our people to say, are you registered where you currently live? Mm-hmm. Because if you're in a group setting and you say, are you registered to vote? Raise your hand. No, everybody's going to raise their hand. And I always say, well, if you're not, we should talk afterwards. I always have people come up to me afterwards. They're not going to talk about it in a group. And you have to frame it correctly. I had a niece, she's in her 30s. And I am Miss Vote, right? And everybody knows that in my family. And I'm like, okay, are you all registered? And she said, Aunt Cheryl, we're not registered. You know, my head did a little spin. But after that, I went over and I registered them to vote. And then I took them on election day, because the polling location can be very intimidating. When you walk in, they're very, what's your address? Right. Well, I don't want to, do that to them, but what's your address? And they'll keep saying that until you give them the address. Most people want to give their name first. Right. But you always, what's your address? It can be intimidating, And so I walked them in there, and they've been voting ever since. And I love the stickers as well. And we do a sticker campaign every year. Like, everybody needs to take a selfie with the little sticker on, and we make a little film strip, and we play with it, and we just make it competitive. You know what I mean? So that, yes, get out, get your sticker, that kind of thing. Just make it fun. Young people love taking selfies.
Maybe the town clerk, and I'll pass this along to Ben Kaufman, have a selfie wall.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Anything we can do. So, talking about, what can people do to hold themselves accountable? How can we create a more positive environment for people to feel comfortable enough to vote? Any thoughts on that hasn't already been said?
Well, I think one key thing is practice. The more we have voting be like something, booths where we can practice, knowing what a polling location looks like where we can practice, having ballots available, not real ballots, of course, but sample ballots, and all of that, just because those are also things that are foreign to our first-time voter friends. And so practice is one of those things that just makes us more comfortable. It makes it a safer space for all of us. And talking about and having a safe place for where we don't know things to answer them.
Yeah, exactly. Love the nonpartisan conversations, right? Keeps it less contentious and more about what's on the ballot. What does a ballot look like? How do you fill in the circle? How do you, right? All the things that you need to know how to do on election day. Just so people really feel comfortable in the space, in voting, feel like they're a part of this movement. Right now, we're getting ready, get geared up for GOTV, get out the vote activities. And people really want to be involved, and giving them simple tasks like phone banking, door knocking, dropping literature, making noise. We use that opportunity to just make noise, right? So that people know, bring out food. People love to go to gatherings with food. So we do these election day operations, get out the vote operation that whole weekend from November 2nd through November 5th. Well, and we invite the community in, so that I was telling someone we're going to host a watch party in Dorchester, because we always bring in the community to downtown Boston, to the W or one of the hotels, which is great. I go, and they're fun. But I said, our community never gets to experience this. They're not in their community watching the results come in, and celebrating the state officials, because we have all the state officials in our community. Celebrate them in their victories, but just really having them engage in simple things like that, where they don't feel any pressure, that kind of thing. So
I absolutely think that voting, you kind of have to create a habit in order for it to really, take hold. So I'm going to bring up a slightly controversial subject. A couple of years ago when I was on select board, we had a petition before us to lower the local, in local elections only, the voting age to 16, 17. I personally supported it because I remember becoming 18, registering to vote, and then like 2 years later, I'm off to college. And it was a logistics nightmare to try to participate in a presidential election. What are your thoughts on, if we get people to vote at a younger age, is that something that might tip the scales.
Oh, can I jump in on
Yes.
this right away? Because we have this debate every year of, should we lower the vote? After we talk about the expansion of voting rights, should the next step be lowering it to 16? And what's been surprising to me is kids actually, the bulk of them say no. And you would think like, yes, I want to take that. I want to do that. And they say no. And well, they look left and look right and they're like, no, I could do it, but I don't trust her, And they said like, we're not experienced enough. Or they say we haven't contributed enough to society. I'm like, they don't use those words. But I was stunned because I thought kids would want to. I'm curious if you guys hear
I do.
similar things.
I have students who are studying it. And first of all, Austria has a 16, and they've pretty much found no difference. There's no cognitive difference between a 16 and an 18-year-old. Mm-hmm. And the advantage is they're in school. And so you can help them in a way that you really can't when they're 18. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some big advantages to lowering it for the reason of creating voters, growing voters.
That's right.
You're really able to, in the setting of a school, do the voter education that we all say is so important. But that's
to build the habit, get your first rep.
Yeah.
It's easy there. I think of it that way.
Yeah, totally agree. They say the younger they become politicized, they'll stay with it. Mm-hmm. They'll just stay with it. When you teach them to use their voice, when you educate them on how the system works, when you even educate them on thinking critically outside of the box, what could the system look like? Mm-hmm. How do you create your own government? And just helping them understand, just putting everything on the table so that they can see what is and what could be possible if I thought a little bit different.
Should we broach the subject of social media?
Okay.
Well, this is Media Literacy Week, so it's a great time to do it. That I think schools across the Commonwealth supposedly should be focusing on this, and then how can we be informed consumers? So go.
I'll start, but I'm just saying, social media has made our young people unsociable in my mind. You can call them on the telephone, they won't pick up the phone. You text them, they respond right away. I'm confused. Is this the same phone, right, that I'm calling, right? But social media has some advantages, getting information out fast, but is it the right information? Is it misinformation, malinformation, disinformation? What kind of information are you getting? And who are you following? Who are making the posts? Mm-hmm. Right? So, social media has an advantage, but I think it has more of a disadvantage, particularly when it comes to politics. I think Google and all these other platforms where you can look up things and research information is a better product for us to use. But social media?
Mm-hmm. To that point, before I ran for select board, I was involved in a couple of campaigns, local campaigns. And I was like the deputy field organizer, and I, had a phone script, and I was giving it out to volunteers, parents who wanted a new school to be built. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget their reaction. The little old ladies, they were on the phone. Their numbers were like 100 calls an hour. But anyone under the age of like 30, they were like, you want me to call someone I don't know?
That's hysterical.
And I'm supposed to say this?
That's hysterical. That is hysterical. Yeah. We have to get back to some of the old. Well, we already know that when you're trying to engage people, that one-on-one, face-to-face is the best way to communicate. And the next best is phones, right? To talk to people. But the idea is that you're talking to people, not just sending a tweet and things of that nature, but really having a conversation. A lot of our communities say they do not hear from elected officials unless it's election season. And our programs run year round because when electoral issues influence the advocacy issues. Advocacy issues inform the electoral issues. So it becomes this seamless circle that we've been able to create so that people are always engaged, not just from June to September or August to November, that kind of thing. No, all the time. We want you to stay engaged, your voice at the table year round, because we have issues year round.
I'm jumping on some, it tags on to what you said earlier, is we're talking about people voting, we're talking about people being engaged in society, and one of the basic skills that can be tied to social media, but it's something we try and work on at school, is just plain old civil discourse. You know, whether it's getting on the phone, but how can you have a fair conversation with someone, and how do you model that as adults? And sometimes as adults we don't, and then the kids get pretty good at about how to, I agree with your point, but, or they add on pieces, and you were talking about language. I think we also have to educate people not just how to vote, but how to talk and how to. You can disagree with someone, and you know, I disagree with much of what you all said tonight. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But like, how can you do that? Listen, and then share your point, and okay, how do we actually work together? I don't know.
But that's something they need to learn.
Right.
To go through life.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And that is what civil discourse is. And it is a skill, and it can be learned, and it can be taught. And it is such an important thing to know how to do, to have conversations, to get to compromise, which maybe nobody likes, but they like it better than nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Provisional ballots. Even I don't really understand what those are.
Well, I can step in there. So let's go back. The reason that we have provisional ballots is after the disastrous 2000 election.
Oh, right.
When we had a bunch of dimpled chads and a lot of votes that we didn't count because of a terrible set of machines, among other things. And one of the discussions that came up after that is, remember, there were all of these people who were really upset because they had been purged from the list, or because they didn't think they voted the right way, et cetera. So what they thought was, we need to have a safeguard. We need to have something so that if somebody is in the wrong line and is if whatever, something is, they can be given a ballot provisionally. We're going to check it later and make sure that you're the eligible voter and that you're voting on the ballot that you're supposed to vote on, et cetera. All of that we check later. But it means that we're not going to deny you the right at that moment to vote, even if, so when we run into problems because we go to the wrong polling location, because we forgot to change our address, because of all of those things, it's a provisional ballot enabling checking later. So it's an important safeguard that came into place through the Help America Vote Act of 2002.
Interesting. You know, it never occurred to me that I would be at risk to be purged from a voter roll, because I show up often. And because I didn't check my snail mail, I'm really bad at that. I didn't see the notice from the town clerk's office to say, hey, do you still live at this address? Send this back to confirm. I was ushered into a different line, like the next time I came. If somebody is nervous that they may have accidentally gotten purged from a voter roll, what are some things that they have, what are their rights?
Okay, so back up just a second. I don't particularly care for provisional ballots. It's a great safeguard. I don't like provisional ballots because they call the election pretty much that night before they even go back and check all the provisional ballots. And we've had a lot of provisional ballots. Now, one of the things that we've been working on is decoupling the census from the voting rolls. Massachusetts is, I think, the only state that punishes their voters for not filling out the annual census by making them inactive. And when you become inactive, you just have to show up. If there's an I, you have to show proof of residency. You show proof of residency, you get a regular ballot. If you do not have proof of residency, then you get the provisional ballot. I just don't have a lot of faith in the provisional ballots. I've seen them used before, but I just don't think I don't have a lot of faith in them. And I think there are other provisions we could put in place, like same-day registration, to get rid of them. Same-day registration is, to me, the total stopgap. If you didn't change your address or change your name, went to the wrong polling location, right there where you are, register, go in the next line and vote. I witnessed it in New Hampshire, seamless. So I'm not sure why we're not going to talk about that part right now, but I do know, I really wish we had same-day registration. We're going to continue to fight for same-day registration because it would eliminate provisional ballots.
Just say a lot of what we do in voting relies on executive functioning skills and to have registration deadlines that vary by state, and that you have to remember to fill out your census, and you have to do this and you have to do that. And some people say, well, that's, those are the basic things that you have to do. But in lots of areas of our lives, we can forget those things and still find a safeguard in a way around them. So it is, and this is also different than, going to get your ears pierced.
Absolutely.
It's expressing your political voice, which is really important. And I say that because when I took my daughter to get her ears pierced, I had to have a birth certificate.
What?
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
To prove her age?
I don't know. I'll say that here. Yeah. I guess to prove her age. Yeah.
But you can pierce a baby's ears. So
I think you need to bring the birth certificate.
Okay.
That was a requirement.
That is new.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So
I've actually learned a little bit about ear piercing, but I've also, I've never really thought deeply about provisional ballots. I heard the term, but and I'm supposed to be teaching this stuff. That's why, once again, getting back at the conversation, it's like, the takeaway for me today is I learned something new, and I have to read a little bit more about provisional ballots. So,
as I said in the beginning, I've heard the term. I could not have defined it at all.
But it's good in this sense that people should never be turned away from the polling location and feel like they're being disenfranchised because they forgot to change their voter registration form. Or there
are other reasons.
Reasons. Exactly. Yeah. There's several reasons, but they should not feel disenfranchised on election day. Everybody has the right to vote. Voting is not a privilege, it's a right, although we treat it like it's a privilege.
Although there is no right to vote in the Constitution. So
I know.
I know. So we argue for it, but it is not enshrined anywhere that you have the right to vote.
And I'm guessing that was on purpose.
Oh yes, you can't discriminate based on sex. You can't discriminate based on race. But what about other things? Sure, that's why many felons are disenfranchised.
Yeah.
What a hanging Chad to leave us on.
Nice.
Thank you so much, panelists.
Thank you. Really
you.
Great.
And thank you for watching our panel discussion, Democracy, What Does It Mean in People's Everyday Lives? Today's conversation is a co-production of NewTV and the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. Any use or reuse of this program requires the approval of NewTV and the League and must be shown in its entirety without any editing only after the program initially airs on NewTV. The opinions and statements of our panel guests are their own and do not in any way represent those of the League of Women Voters or NewTV. Membership in the League is open to all people. For more information, visit lwvma.org. NewTV is Newton's award-winning, state-of-the-art media center, specializing in television production, training, and building community partnerships. It is Newton's primary source of local relevant programming. Membership in NewTV is open to all Newton residents. For more information, visit the website at newtv.org. I'm Heather Hamilton for the League of Women Voters. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport.